G'day legends, I hope that you're all having a great day. Now today we're going to talk about some information that I was sent and I've actually been looking into and researching a little bit, but then of course we'll have a look at the maps and just some other news that is going around. Now we've had the feeling and are being told that this main Ukrainian offensive is imminent, but we've had this feeling and have been told this now for seemingly months. Now I don't doubt that what we're seeing is not the main push and the main push is still to come, but it would seem that we are definitely waiting on something. And what is that something? Could it be that Russia's defences are working to a higher standard, or could it potentially be the air cover from the F-16s that would come in the future, or something else? What this leads us into is potentially then winter and the stagnancy of the war in winter, and by the time that it dries out for spring, we'll be well beyond the second year of this war. But there is another pressing issue that I don't think gets talked about enough that will influence both Russia and Ukraine, not only within the limits of this war, but long after the shells have stopped falling. So the reason I wanted to talk about this was the MOD update came through today from the British MOD. So on the 29th of June 23, Ukrainian authorities reported that under the emergency legislation, 139,000 citizens have been evacuated from the combat zones in the Ukrainian-controlled area of Donetsk, Kharkiv, Kherson regions since July 22. This is just one part of Ukraine's ongoing border crisis of displacement. The United Nations estimates 6.3 million Ukrainians remain refugees and over 5 million internally displaced. With a pre-war population of 44 million, a quarter of Ukrainians remain forced from their homes as a result of the Russian invasion. And we know that a lot of people have left their homes into Europe, not only people who have had to flee their homes from the east in parts of bombing, but people from Lviv, the capital, and other areas who have chosen to leave Ukraine under this war. I've had some contact over the last couple of months with an official from Poland who has to stay anonymous, who has expressed some issues that they're facing. Now, I can't share the majority of what I was sent, being the graphs, a lot of the information that I was given due to confidentiality, and I also can't quote directly. So what I'll be doing is I'll actually be using ChatGPT. Yep, the world is changing, but I'll be using that to paraphrase the quotes for me, at least to attempt to limit my bias or any language that I'd use. So I hope this works as a bit of a workaround. After the dam incident, we've seen a large influx of Ukrainian crossing the border into Poland. The base trend was minus 100,000 a month negative, so going back into Ukraine. But this figure is greatly skewed, as we know a lot of troops were returning to Ukraine for the counteroffensives over April and May. And in June alone, we have a 60,000 positive, so crossing into Poland from Ukraine, which is a large change from the months before. Paraphrase. As you may be aware, Poland has a significant historical relationship with Russia, which has led to distinct sensitivities. Recently, a conflicting sentiment is emerging, wherein we find ourselves torn. On one hand, we desire Ukraine to resist and counter Russia's influence. However, simultaneously, there is a growing realization that hosting a large Ukrainian population comes with its own challenges, similar to the concept of a, quote, Ukrainian ghetto, for the lack of a better comparison. Some individuals have even suggested the idea of establishing a little Kiev in Warsaw, akin to the concept of Chinatown. In my humble opinion, the crucial turning point was when a rocket landed in Poland, resulting in the unfortunate deaths of Polish farmers. This incident deeply disappointed us, particularly due to the Zelensky's denials and his overall attitude. The breach of trust in him was even more significant than the impact of the Ukrainian rocket itself. Right-wing individuals are particularly sensitive about the historical events of Volyn. Now, what is Volyn? And I do apologise if I am pronouncing this incorrectly, but from the European Network Remembrance and Solidarity, the ethnic cleansing known as Volyn massacre continued from the 9th of February 1943 until 18th May 1945. This operation, masterminded by the Ukrainian insurgency army, took approximately 100,000 Polish lives. Polish historians agree that this was a methodical campaign demonstrating characteristic features of genocide, where Polish children's heads were on fences. Additionally, the controversial incident of Zaluzhny, of course, Valery Zaluzny is the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, posing with a picture of Bandera. Further exacerbates the situation. On the other hand, left-wing individuals are questioning why there is a presence of military-aged males from Ukraine and whether they should receive social welfare benefits that are specific to Ukrainians. It appears that there is a lack of sufficient training facilities, although it seems that these individuals are not permitted to leave the country. There is a growing sentiment among some individuals that our country is burdened by internal problems, such as inflation. While the majority of those seeking refuge are women and children, people are beginning to notice the presence of many young men who have evaded military conscription. These men are often seen intoxicated on the streets, relying on social welfare benefits specific to Ukrainian individuals, and displaying highly aggressive behaviour. Additionally, there are concerns regarding car insurance, as many of them lack proper coverage and the vehicles are in poor condition. In the grand scheme of things, these issues may seem relatively insignificant, but considering the passage of 1.5 years, they are gradually accumulating and becoming more noticeable. So again, from a Polish official sent over to me, but of course had to be paraphrased, and the graphs and whatever I was sent over could only be referred to, not used themselves. And this leads into an issue facing both Ukraine and Russia around population decline. Now, Professor Ella Libanova, who is a director of the Pudka Institute for Demography and Social Studies of the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine, writes this for the Wilson Center in Washington. So every month that Ukrainian refugees remain abroad reduces the likelihood of their return to Ukraine. On the other hand, they are working hard to adapt to living conditions in another country. On the other hand, the possibilities for a return to Ukraine decrease with the ongoing targeted destruction of residences and critical infrastructure. The number of potential jobs in Ukraine is also declining, so refugees wanting to return to Ukraine might have nowhere to return to. The polls show that Ukrainian war refugees cite security, the availability of housing and work opportunities as the main conditions for their return. And we know there was articles released by the Kiev Independent earlier this year saying that only a third of those who left Ukraine were looking then to return. This continues forecasting Ukraine's demographic situation. Despite all the risks that await them, I estimate that at least half of the refugees will return to their homeland after the war. The experience of the Balkan countries suggests that about a third of those who fled the war could actually return home. The high level of Ukrainians' patriotism, demonstrated by the return of 200,000 men from the developed countries to Ukraine in the first 2 weeks of the war, provide grounds for my more optimistic expectations of 50% coming back. If Ukraine's economy is slow to revive after the war's end, however, and if employment opportunities are unsatisfactory, Ukrainian families that are now divided, with many Ukrainian women and children abroad, may choose to reunify abroad, not inside the country. This means Ukraine may lose an additional 1 to 1.5 million young, educated men. It bears emphasising that Ukraine is losing to migration not only the general population, but people of a relatively young reproductive age, educated and with work qualifications, usually determined to succeed, efficient and entrepreneurial. So the migration-related losses should be tallied not only in numbers, but in the quality of the demographic resources lost in Ukraine. So if you have someone who is 80 who's finished their work life, they shouldn't be put to the same level of the numbers lost for someone who's 20 who has been either killed or has then migrated out of the country for the rebuilding of the country. They are significantly different. Now, another important factor driving population loss is lower fertility rate. First with the pandemic and then Russia's aggression caused a decline in Ukraine's fertility rate, which was already the lowest in Europe. The fertility rate in 21 was 1.2 and 22 expected to be 0.9. Since the births planned before the war were still delivered in 2022, a much more dramatic drop in fertility rate is expected in 2023. Most probably achieve 0.7, and this will remain until at least the end of the war. So if you have entered the war pregnant, you're going to have the child. But young couples in the midst of the war, facing so much uncertainty in the future, are probably not looking at having children. We're seeing this all over the developed world. Young couples, even take myself and Lily, for example, in a world of so much uncertainty, and Australia has a lot more certainty than Ukraine, a country which is plunged into a full-on invasion and wartime. are choosing to have less and less children, and this fertility and replacement rate is having dire consequences, and we will feel these consequences not in the next year or two but further down the line. Now, irreversible human losses, deaths including direct losses of military and civilians due to hostilities and indirect losses caused by a lack of timely medical care in the occupied territory, especially in the active hostilities and shelling, have had an already significant impact on the average life expectancy of Ukrainians. For 23-24, the ALE will remain critically low, 70.9 years for women and 57.3 years for men. No one's jumping up and down about equality, about men not being able to leave the country, and we see here almost a 20-year difference in average life expectancy. But we can expect a return to pre-war levels, 76.4 and 66.4 years respectively, no earlier than 2032, so still 9 years away. So this is what I've talked about a lot with this, is the majority of people dying in this war are young military-aged males on Russia and Ukraine. Young military-aged males, these are some of the most important people to your economy as a whole, arguably the most important people. If a young military-aged male has died in the war and his partner has moved internationally, the odds of them coming back, I would say, are greatly reduced, as well as these people have their whole life ahead of them to live, develop the country, entrepreneurial, efficient, and pay taxes the whole time. And the two things, what are a constant in life, are death and taxes, but you're killing off your youngest tax base is very difficult, as well as young people to have more children to help this, and this can go into a spiral down. In the best case scenario, the country's development, that is a return to the 1991 borders and rapid economic environmental recovery, further depopulation seems inevitable. Most probably by 2035, the population of Ukraine will have decreased by another 18%, falling from the current 37.6 million to 31 million for the Ukraine 1991 territory. The demographic group of those aged 20 to 64 years old will decrease by 15%, falling from 23.7 million to 20.2 million, while the number of women in the most active reproductive range, 20 to 34, will decrease by 11% from 2.9 million to 2.6 million, in a population that was already shrinking with low fertility rates and people seeking to migrate out. Now, Russia is also facing significant population decline, some have described as a nightmare. Alcoholism and healthcare shortage has absolutely had a major play in the reduction of life expectancy among working aged males, and this has dropped precipitously. The Russian fertility rate has declined to among the world's lowest. The population replacement rates, the foreign ownership in Ukraine, the longer this war continues, could get worse and worse for independent Ukraine. And I fear the more this comes into play, the further from that EU and NATO membership Ukraine could potentially become more unstable. And for both Ukraine and Russia, this war is just exacerbating those problems which were already dramatic and were already affecting the countries greatly. So the further this goes on, the worse it is going to get. We have hundreds of thousands of primarily young people killed, and these young people, they're your working base. They're your people breeding for the economy. It's going to get worse and worse for both countries. But we could potentially see another baby boom that we did see happen after the close of the Second World War. But someone who looks into this stuff, I think these population collapse, this reduced infertility rate we're seeing everywhere, is something that is facing the world very quickly and very head on. And in your and my lifetimes, or maybe not mine with my tumour, but in your lifetimes, this will become a major issue. President Zelensky on Twitter has said, last week was difficult on the front line, but we are making progress. We are moving forward step by step. I thank everyone who is defending Ukraine, everyone who is leading this war to Ukraine's victory, accompanied by a video montage of strike against Russian vehicles and Russian personnel. Now, CNN today quoted Zelensky as stating, "We cannot imagine Ukraine without Crimea. And while Crimea is under the Russian occupation, it means only one thing. The war is not over yet." And asked whether there would be any scenario under which there could be peace without Crimea, Zelensky has said, "It will not be victory then." Although many Western leaders, commanders, have put doubts on Ukraine's ability to take back Crimea. So, let's have a look at the maps and see if there's any changes. But something we do need to remember, and I do this a little bit myself, maps do not reflect the fighting on the ground. Say Bakhmut, for example, where we saw very little or no changes in maps for weeks or months at a time. Both Ukraine and Russia had both stated Bakhmut was not about taking ground. Either way, it was about the meat grind, about wearing down forces. And we saw claims of both sides of this claiming that, and we saw success, if you want to say that, and there's no success. I don't believe in any people dying in a bloody unjust war, but success militarily, I guess, of not moving forward and wearing down the forces. So just because there's no map movements doesn't mean that there's not successes or gains or losses on the ground, other than just the geography. Of course, here we have the deep state map. We have Ukraine in the centre, the capital of Kyiv, the red areas occupied since Feb 24, 22, and the purple since 14, this being Crimea that we just spoke about. Of course, we have Romania, Poland, Belarus, and Russia around here. Now, we're seeing a lot of fighting up and down the front line, but not too many movements. Now, this map updated about 4 or 5 hours ago for myself. So, firstly, let's go to the westernmost area. We're seeing a lot of changes. Now, we're not seeing any map changes here, but we're getting a lot of speculation about what is happening here. So this is Oleshki here, and of course here is the Antonivka Bridge. And now, Ukraine has crossed over the Dnieper River, it has been said, and formed some level of a bridgehead down through the Kherson Oblast, although this isn't being shown at all on the deep state map. But if we come across into the ISW, we can see this blue territory here in which Ukraine has managed to get some ground in and amongst here. Of course, this being the main area of the Dnipro, but we know the flooding down here, downstream from the Novokhovka, which sits in here, has caused major issues for both Ukraine and Russia in and around this region. So let's go through here now. The nuclear power plant in Zaporizhia here has been the main talk of a lot. I'm going to do a breakdown in this, and so many people have been asking me about this, but we do know that the main power supply was reconnected today, and so many people are speculating all the way through to President Zelensky about a potential false flag event or something here from Russia to create a buffer zone or a nuclear fallout, something around this region. But right now we're not seeing any real evidence of this. So let's have a look on the western or southwestern side. So we have Stepove, Lobkovy in here. Now, we have seen some change over the last couple of days, but since yesterday to today, we didn't really see any changes on this map. Now, from the south of Orikhiv, what we do see is no change in where the frontline position is, but we do see that it's just an update from green to blue. Unsure exactly why this was made, but we do see that the blue did increase to the south a small percentage. So let's go to this region on then the ISW map. And I do like to point out in this region, this is where these major defensive works are. And we have seen even the Kiev Independent write about these defensive works and coming up to these. So let's have a look at yesterday's position here compared to today's between the ISW, because we can't step back on a day or two. Are we seeing any changes here? To my eye, we're not seeing any changes in this region between yesterday and today on these maps, whether it be blue or the yellow claimed control. Now, we have this region as well from the Rybar Russian sources. Now, yesterday's from the 7th on the 2nd will be on the left, and today's will be on the right. Of course, today is the 4th in Australia, but this is the most recent map that has come out. Now, what changes are we really seeing here? Now, let's just zoom in on Lobkovy, Stepove region here. Now, what are we seeing any changes in the front line? Now, I don't think that we're seeing the front in any real dramatic movements change, but we have seen that Ukraine has got more territory down towards this Zarabatki here than the deep state and then ISW are showing, and that is very interesting. But for my eye, between these two isn't showing too much difference. Now, of course, where we're going to go to next is to the south of Orikhiv in Robotyne, where we've spoken about a lot. Now, is the shaping of the front line looking any different? No, but we can see that Rybar is saying that Ukrainian forces had come in and that Russia had deployed forces from Robotyne in here, and then some forces had to then withdraw. Some Ukrainian forces then had to withdraw backwards, but from that is all we have, and it's not showing too much different there. So let's look in, zoom in areas here. And as we can see, the actual frontline position hasn't really changed. And these obfuscations, of course, is just forested regions built up down tree lines, separating paddocks, things like this. And there's been a lot of fighting in and around here, but Ukraine has deployed in and apparently has then had to withdraw from these positions as well. But the movement hasn't changed much, but we know there is a hell of a lot of fighting happening in this region. Now, next, let's move up into where we've seen Ukraine probably have the most success is this Rivnopil Uruzani region here. Now, between yesterday and today, we don't see any changes, but we have seen some dramatic shifts over a few days or a week in this region, mainly with the loss or the Russia's loss of occupied Rivnopil as well, but no real movements there. Let's move up then on the ISW, and of course, as always, we'll compare the ISW from yesterday, of course, in this little window being till today. Now, are we seeing any dramatic shifts or real shifts at all? Not really, and we do know that this counteroffensive is moving slower than a lot of people would like. It's been spoken about even from the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, that the slowness has been unprecedented. So in this same region, we do have a Rybar Russian sources from today. Let me just close some of these. So this is what we are talking about here, called the Vermivka sector. So where we're looking at, I wish these would line up a little bit better, but we have Staryamorsky, Uruzani, and Uruzani sits just below Staryamorsky in here. So let's have a look and see how different these front lines are looking. Now, it can be hard for me to get these all on the same page, but let's have a look. We do see, I believe, on the Rybar Russian sources, that is showing that Ukraine has got more territory to the southwest of Novodonetsk, pushing further down into here, further to the south of Uruzani and Staryamorsky here. So if we look at Staryamorsky, we see that this is basically a straight line across to Novodonetsky on the deep state, but is not shown that on the Rybar Russian sources. But we know there's a lot of fighting in and around this region, and saying that Ukraine did deploy forces from Rivnopil to Prioritany in here. So Rivnopol, Prioritany in this region, so this push, and as well to Levadny. And on the second part of that pizza, from Levadny, which sits in here into this region as well. But those offensives were counted according to then this map. So it is interesting just to have a look and see what is showing different there. So next, let's go up to we're seeing a lot of fighting again in Ukraine, having some success, but then Russia having some success as well into Bakhmut. Now, between yesterday and then the 3rd to the 4th, we do see that Russia did manage to get some territory here down amongst this reservoir. And we know that it was a big shift for Ukraine to actually push to just to here over to the east side of where this waterway runs. But we do see just to the south of Bakhmut here, we do see that Russia did get some small territory in to the direction of Druzhba here as well. So that is interesting to see these pushes happening around then to the south as well. But we did see that Russia did get back some ground near Berkivka, but over yesterday to today, we haven't seen any real change in and around there. So of course, let's go onto the ISW that did show this. So this is the ISW map for today. Now, this yellow bit we see to the south, this is the area that the deep state is talking about here in the direction of Druzhba, of Pevichny here. So this is the region here pushing out, but only under claimed control. So let's have a look between yesterday and today of Bakhmut and see if there's any changes that we're not seeing between the ISW. So this part down here, although updated on the deep state only today, was shown yesterday, but we do see one significant change. We do see to the west of Klishkivka here, we do see that this spire out here that was Russian assessed control has pulled back, so somewhat down through here. So Ukraine has gained and Russia has lost some ground to the southwest of Bakhmut here. Bakhmut itself, I don't think it's showing any difference. And to the north, we did see Russia claim some control here. I don't think we're seeing much of a difference either. Now, what we are going to do is just push to the north here of Bakhmut into Seversk. Now, we don't see any real changes here on the map. Let's then go onto the ISW, and these are showing a fairly similar picture, but with more of the yellow claimed control in Seversk. And this was released from Rybar sources here today say that there has been more attacks in and around Dobrova here, and we know that the forests of Kremenar, this region, has been under a lot of fighting. And of course, this is saying that Russia launched offensives, and so did Ukraine, into areas here. We know there's a hell of a lot of fighting going on here as well. Now, how different are these maps showing? I don't think too differently as far as the areas around Spurny, Bilohorivka, areas like this. And these photos here, of course, are geolocated to the regions we're talking about. Here it's showing that these counter-offensives here, but they have said that Ukraine did get some ground, but that was repulsed from there. So it is interesting. There's a lot of fighting here, and a lot of speculated about Ukraine's need to get both Lysychansk and Severodonetsk region here, as these are main hubs for the Russian forces. So the Kiev Independent has written, war is brutal and unpredictable and rarely goes one side's way, all or even most of the time. Looking at how things have gone so far, the Ukrainian command could still decide that committing to an all or nothing attack is just too risky. And even if it does commit, it's entirely possible that it could fail. And this is something I see really from neither side, is both sides are convinced that eventually their side will prevail and win, and not taking into account any other outcomes for this conflict. And there's no guarantee that Russia will win. There's no guarantee Ukraine will win. It's a spectrum. And in a world full of spectrums, things like this, people's political views, whatever, seem to be incredibly binary, or you have to be binary. Now, where this will end up, I don't know. It'll be somewhere on the spectrum. I have my doubts about Crimea, but I also have incredible doubts about Russia's ability to have any offensive operations, or at least large scale, into areas like Kiev again, Kharkiv, Dnipro. It's just, in my opinion, just not going to happen. So it is hard, but the all or nothing tactic could be the undoing of a lot for Ukraine. And I've said before and speculated that the all or nothing attitude, is this the best attitude? Now, I'm not a decision maker, I'm just an idiot on YouTube. But if Ukraine does commit everything at once and it doesn't work, what then do they have to fall back on? As we know, diplomatic relations have been absolutely out of the question. So the all or nothing is interesting to talk about, but very interesting article from the Kiev Independent as well. Of course, heavily biased source, but putting some doubts on how this is actually going, and saying as well that it was meant to really happen in June down to Melitopol, but we haven't really seen that much. But we will see more in the future, I am sure, and we will have to, with, Zelensky saying it's not over until Crimea, but it has to happen before winter sets in, because then we know there's a period of not much happening. But in that period, we could see the adaptation of modern fighter equipment and whatever in as well. So, guys, thank you so much for all your support, especially all the new people who have come across for the other interviews that have happened. So cheers, I hope you're looking after yourselves, doing well. If you'd like to support me, links below, but never feel obliged. Thank you very much. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.